really delightful. My name is Lucinda Walker. I am the director of the Norwich Public Library. I want to welcome you to our Fall Festival Snapshot program, Rumble Strip, Building Community in Our Divided Society, with Erica Heilman.
Okay.
Each year, Vermont Humanities hosts a fall festival for Arts and Humanities Month. This year's theme of 50 Years Forward looks at the many challenges our communities facing our communities and highlights moments of celebration as we move forward into a critical time to create a more welcoming and resilient state. Learn more at vermonthumanities.org for information about the festival and the snapshot events happening around the state. The sponsor of our snapshot season is the Vermont Department of Libraries. Yay! The Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Alma Gives Donkian Foundation. The next live stream Fall Festival event will be hosted by the Burnham Memorial Library, and it features Professor Catherine Wright, Chair of Digital Humanities at Champlain College. It's going to be at 4 o'clock on October 23rd, and you can register online and get a link to the live stream. So now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Erica Heilman. She was at a First Wednesdays event a number of years ago, and the audience was maybe a third of who was here. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh no. We were in the big congregational church, and I said, people just don't know what podcasts are yet. And now I think everyone knows what a podcast is, but I bet every one of you has sat in your car or in your kitchen or gardened, and you've heard Erica's voice in your head, or your headphones, and the wonderful people she interviews. And if you're like me, you probably cry at least once, maybe twice. She is the producer of Rumble Strip, an independent podcast located in East Calais, Vermont. The show features interviews and commentaries and occasional experiments, which are mostly about other Vermonters. She is the winner of a Peabody Award, a Third Coast Award, an Independent Media Institute Award. Her work is aired on Radio Lab, Snap Judgment, the CBC, and public radio affiliates across the country. In 2022, The New Yorker named Rumble Strip the best podcast of the year. In it, Sarah Larson described it as, quote, endlessly inventive, independently produced podcast about her Vermont community, revealing through an almost miraculous level of attention what life anywhere is all about. So sit back, open your ears, and welcome Erica.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just going to do an IT check because it never works. It's never going to work the first time. I just want to make sure. It's working. It's a miracle. Okay. Thank you all for coming. And I thought that I would just start with an outtake from an interview. A couple of you have heard this before, but it's just important to me that you know that you're in good hands, that you know that I really know what I'm doing and that what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to start there.
And so there could be a signal channel for people who like to crochet. Mm-hmm. I mean, why is this community so responsive to why? I said a question that makes sense, but why is this community so responsive?
This stuff.
Why is this community showing up so loyally or so? Fuck am I asking? Why is the queer community so responsive?
So that's really what an interview actually sounds like. Yeah. So I is this interfering with this? Does anybody know that whether I should check that? Do you hear that?
No, hold
Hold on, let me just check. Look at this. No, it was just what it is. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that my thing wasn't interfering with your thing. So, as you know, Rumble Strip is a podcast, which is just essentially it's a radio show, but without FCC guidelines and without a livable wage. So, thank you, Vermont Public, for being my family and my home. The show is really about all the unimportant things that happen between the important parts, like, between the weddings and the funerals. It's about how we get through the day, but it's really mostly a selfish thing about how I get through the day. I have a very firm belief that everybody I interview or everybody I meet knows something that if I knew it, I could get through my day better. That they know something that will be a puzzle piece that will help me figure out what's going on. So there's a way in which it's this sort of selfish and desperate project. It's also about Vermont, which is where I grew up, and I'm obsessed with Vermont. How it works and how it doesn't work. I love it, and I also really hate it here. I've never been married, but I suspect that that's what happens in a marriage, is that you have to love the parts you don't like, or learn to do that, and that's how I feel about Vermont. But I feel eternally given to it, and I think that if you make stories about a place long enough, you start to see the contours of that place and the people who live in it, and its values and its habits, and how people live together, and how people live next door to each other. Vermont, it's getting better, but Vermont still gets covered, bridgified a lot. It's a pretty calendar, this place where we live. But I think to love a place, or a person probably, but to love a place, you have to know the dark parts and the peculiar parts and even the ugly parts. Or maybe if you love something, you love all the parts, including the parts that you don't see on a calendar. There's my son Henry and I, when we lived in St. Johnsbury, and we lived near White's Market, which is where we went grocery shopping, and in the winter, which is endless, I remember coming out of the store and into the dark, crappy parking lot, and there were always like 3 women in their early 20s smoking a butt in their pajama bottoms and winter boots. And I almost, every time I'd see them, I just felt warm. Like, I know where I am. And I felt I loved them, and they anchored me in the winter when I went grocery shopping. So part of what I was trying to think about talking about tonight, and I'm riffing because this is just my perspective, but it's about community, and we love to talk about community in Vermont. I'm not really sure what it means. I think it means something slightly different to everybody, but the quality of community is really contingent on how we commune. So in a way that this is going to be a talk about community, but more accurate maybe to say that I'll be talking about how we commune with each other and how the quality of that communing affects the quality of the communities that we make together. I fall in love with everybody I interviewed. I feel like that's part of the job, and that's the honor that somebody's giving me their time, and I fall in love with all of them. And it's not necessarily that I like them, but I have to love them, and there's a difference. There's a kind of radical openness to love that is even somehow more accessible than like. So liking doesn't matter so much. It's about curiosity and about this radical openness. And I'm hoping that the show encourages listeners to fall in love with strangers, and to find themselves in the lives of people who are unlike themselves. So I'm going to play some audio. After the July flood, I was doing a lot of reporting with Vermont Public. We were all out doing whatever we could do. And the first story that I made was in Plainfield, which was hit really hard. Just really was really bad in July there. And I heard that there was a woman who had lost her house. There were a number of people who lost their homes on the Great Brook. And so I hiked up. You know, they were great, these guys who were essentially rebuilding the road. And I was like, can I go through there? And they let, Vermont, they let me go through there. So I went up and I found her, and she was staying with a neighbor across the river. And I sat and I talked with her, and I'm just going to play that story.
It started kind of early, like I was told, watch out, we got a flash flood warning or whatever, and I didn't really understand what a flash flood was, you know. The home I was in was there for 74 years without being hurt. And so I never expected the whole house to be taken away into the river and destroyed. Everything that I owned for my whole life and worked for my animal, my cat, is the most important thing. Captain, he's my buddy, you know, my best friend. And being in a house where you see the dirt, the dark water just bursting through the door. In fact, it busted the door open. So it was pouring in like spurts, huge spurts, 5-foot spurts. So fast, it was destroying everything. In fact, it tore the whole kitchen down. And I was in the bedroom, in the back bedroom with the cat, trying to keep him safe. It's my fault, really, because I should have left a lot sooner. I didn't know where to go, but because I can't walk either. My leg, there's something very wrong with my leg. We don't know what it is yet, but I can't walk. I could feel the house getting hit every few seconds by trees and rocks, and it was terrifying. But I was calling for help for like 2 hours because I didn't hear from the fire department, and I lost my phone somehow. So I couldn't call again. And all of a sudden I could hear it ring. I put my cat up on I had a ladder in the house, about 6 feet maybe, and I put my cat on the upper floor to keep him safe from all the water coming in case the door bursts through again. And I found the phone, and I could hear it ringing. It was this lady here, my neighbor, calling to see if I was okay. And I said, no, I'm trapped. I said, I called the fire department an hour ago. And I said, can your sons maybe try to help me or something to get out of here? And she said, yeah, we went over, and she without her, this is 11 o'clock at night. I'd been calling for help for 2 hours. And it was so loud, like rocks, hitting rocks constantly in the water. It was so loud, I kept getting hit in the building, like I said, it kept shaking. And I finally said the Lord's Prayer because I knew I didn't have much time at all, maybe 5 minutes. And I was ready. And I had said, Lord, I'm ready. And that's when the fire department showed up and banged on the window, and they finally had to break the window in as fast as possible. I didn't want to put them in danger. They were waiting for me. And then I said, I have to get my cat. And they said, it's now or never. We have to leave now or not at all. And I looked back and forth several times. I called to them. I had to dive out the window. I didn't want to risk their safety. It's a horrible choice, really, a horrible choice for me, because he belonged to my mom and she passed away. So she asked me to take care of him. And then as we were leaving, crossing the road, walking across trees and stuff, I was calling to him, hoping he'd be right behind. And I don't know where he is. 2 days later, almost. When did the house? We could hear it go. After we walked in, the house went into the river, broke apart. Go. And what now? God's plan? Who knows?
The other thing that strikes me about this whole thing is just how bad the housing situation is.
It's really bad because we got millions that shouldn't be here right now, in my opinion. And a lump sum like that, you can't handle it. No one can handle millions at a time. And someone's doing something wrong. Americans should be coming first anyway because we're the taxpayers. That's just how I feel. But there's nothing I can do, you know? So you either trust God or you don't.
That was Allison Loreen. I'm going to put a link to her GoFundMe on my website, rumblestripvermont.com. Just go to the website and then click on the...
So after that story aired, I got an email from a listener that said essentially two things. It said, "How dare you not challenge her on that racist assertion about millions of immigrants, and how dare you ask us to give her money?" It was amazing, fascinating. It was an amazing email to get. First of all, I mean, I don't think she listens anymore because I was rather terse in my response. But you know, I don't think of myself as a reporter in any standard sense, and it certainly, I mean, the job is to reflect a community back to itself, and she lives there. So there's that. But also, and more interesting to me, that the listener felt that Allison did not deserve her support after losing everything in a flood because she watches Fox, because she believes things that the listener finds unbelievable. Which I get it. I do understand it. I think it's a symptom of people experiencing each other, though, as ideologies and not as people. Experiencing people as sound bites in the media. And I think it's gotten so bad that we don't even see it now, or we sometimes don't see it. So there's the way that we get our news and how siloed we are, and also there's a lot of life that doesn't happen in person anymore. The places in rural Vermont, as we all know, that you run into people, it's, you know, general stores or the town clerk's office or the local school. And these places primarily serve the function of selling us toilet paper and collecting our taxes and educating our children. But there are fewer and fewer excuses to get together with people who are unlike ourselves. We have online shopping and online banking and remote working and self-checkouts at the store, expediencies. We're regionalizing our school boards, consolidating schools, closing general stores. Many towns are choosing to move to Australian ballot because if more people check a box on a ballot, then that's better democracy. It's more efficient, some people believe. So we love efficiency. I love efficiency, but all of these efficiencies mean that we just have fewer reasons to shoot the shit in front of the general store with somebody we see there. That's where we see them and catch up. And when we talk about good communities, efficient isn't really the first word that comes to mind. I mean, that's not a word that we use when we talk about places we love. I want to play one quick thing here. You'll all know what this is, but I'll tell you anyway. It's a little piece from a town meeting in Vernon, and they're talking about trash removal. Important.
Please state your name. Chuck Kosis. Some of us in this town already have a dumpster, so we have to walk out with those puny bags. They don't hold anything. They're darn expensive, and I don't feel like having to pay twice because, and frankly, when you go to Triple T Trucking, they tell you recycling. Just need to go away. I don't need to pay twice for my rubbish. So, thank you.
Chair would recognize Mr. Gilligan.
Patrick Gilligan. I believe the pay-as-you-throw program is a great benefit to the town of Vernon. Norm Bowers, my grandfather, worked at Triple T. He gave the town of Vernon a very good rate to do this, and I hope we all vote yes on this.
Further discussion on the motion? The gentleman walking up to the microphone.
Andrew Gant. I've heard a lot of people mention about how cheap pay-as-you-throw is, and I'm sure for our older families in town it may be, but as a father of a family of 3 kids and a wife, Once you have a handful of diapers in those bags, they break as you go down the driveway.
Further discussion on Article number 12. Over here?
Hi. I know diapers are heavy because I now have a great-grandson. Anyway, between the diapers for the children and the diapers for the elderly and all the little other pads in between, those things are recyclable and can be put in the cow bin.
Good stuff, right? So, I mean, you all know what it, I mean, it's a remarkable thing that happens. We all become legislators for one day a year all together. It's incredible, and we get together and decide how to spend our money. And we fight it out over gravel every year and a grader and whether we can afford it or not. And then we all look awful because it's March and we're all sort of like, we're salt smeared and we look terrible. And then we all have a big potluck, or at least in my town, we have a big potluck, lunch at the end of it. It is not perfect. It is definitely not efficient. But it is one of the last places where you gather together with people who are not like you, and all kinds of people from town show up, and they're people you like and they're people you don't like. And some people you don't agree with about anything at the meeting. But I am amazed every year about the civility of those meetings. That in person, how often does this happen? In-person disagreement, respectful disagreement, looking at each other, and then having to figure it out, because we have to figure it out together. And it's also the most incredible proof that everyone is an expert. You've got, right there, you've got diesel mechanics and teachers and nurses and lawyers and, all kinds of people in there. And we will draw on those skill sets through the course of the day. And there's something about that we all just inherently love. Or I think so, don't we? We love that. That there's a kind of mutual respect that happens, and that it's nice to feel that you can rely on one another, that you in fact are relying on one another. But also, and I had to be taught this in a show I made about town moderators, that town meeting culture happens all year in Vermont. I mean, all of our towns are run by volunteers. The select board and the cemetery commission and the zoning board and all of these boring committees, right, are run by us. And that's how things move, which means that at least once, for everybody gets hit up. I'm sure all of you have been hit up to be on one of these committees. And your number gets called and you have to do it. But that means that every month you are sitting in a room with people who, once again, you don't necessarily like or agree with, and you have to put aside your differences. But the other thing is, you realize that you actually do like people who you don't agree with. It's kind of surprising. You realize how much more you actually have in common. And this could be somebody you don't agree with about anything, but they become sympathetic to you. So that's social capital, right? That's the glue that holds us all together. And that's why we are so good at crises. So when the floods come, our towns generally know what the hell to do, because we know the select board, we know his or her phone number, we know who has an excavator and a dump truck and who might be willing to haul it out. We know that there's somebody who might be able to fill out all those FEMA forms. And so there are practical reasons why it's good to live in a place where there is strong social capital. But it also means that you know where you live. It means that you don't just live in a house on the side of a road. You live in this house on this road. And you're not just shuttling in your car between your house and your friend's house, or your house and the houses of people somewhat like you. You sort of know that you are somewhere. And that's a profound thing that not everybody gets to feel. So I think that I don't want to get sort of woo about it, right? But I feel like there's a magic to this. I don't know what the word is for it, but I feel it every year at town meeting. There's a kind of just a profound, there's something where we all draw together, and there's just this profound mutual respect that happens that feels very rare and very precious to me. This is something I feel every year at town meeting, multiple times at town meeting. I'm going to play another segment. This is from a show I made about town moderators, and this is my friend Kelly Green, who is the town moderator in Randolph.
I remember a town meeting where our town, a child had gone missing in our town, and the FBI came to town to investigate immediately, and had gone to the library. They had a tip and wanted to seize and search the library's public computers. And the librarians told the FBI that they needed to get a warrant. The town was grief-stricken and was enraged that the library would, at a time like that, demand that the FBI get a warrant. Like, everyone in town was like, are you kidding me? A child is missing, and what? This town meeting afterwards, the library budget, of course, is up for discussion, as it is every year. And the people were still really angry with the library. But a patron and I think trustee of the library, again, a volunteer, someone living in town, elderly woman stood up and gave the most passionate defense of the Fourth Amendment and civil liberties to the people on the floor that I have ever witnessed. And, you know, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I spend all day trying to make speeches about the Fourth Amendment. And this woman, who also had been, moved with grief about this crime, could also give this smart, compassionate speech where people applauded afterwards. She really persuaded people to understand why at that moment was when our civil liberties did matter. Everyone was sad, but was moved by her speech. And did the library budget pass? The library budget passed. I'm always surprised and in awe and bowled over by a neighbor who shines.
So what I love about my job, it's amazing that I get to have this job, is that is exploring all the worlds in Vermont that are all layering up on each other. And one of the best parts about living in rural Vermont is that most towns are still not monochromatic, or people who have a lot are living next to people who don't have a lot. In my part of Calais, there are trappers and doctors and writers and felons, and it's better. It's just more interesting to live in a town like that. And it really frustrates me when people say that there's no diversity in Vermont, because there is profound cultural and socioeconomic diversity here, and each region is distinctive, and each town is distinctive. And I worry that if we don't recognize this kind of diversity around us, then we will become invisible to each other. I think that we are getting better we're getting better at talking about race. We're getting there. We're getting better at talking about gender. We are somehow leaving class out of the conversation often, and I think that's not good. And I actually think also that these particular issues of class and culture are central to a lot of the issues that we're facing in Vermont, and we're not focusing on them as much as we might. we hear about poverty, but very seldom do we hear from poor people, because poor people are not generally part of the media sphere. So we don't hear from them. And my fear is that if we never hear from people, they are not entirely real to us. They live outside of our imaginations, and they become caricatures. A few years ago, when Trump was elected, we were all running around like, oh God, how do we report and whatever? And I didn't know, but I felt desperate. Good ideas really come from desperation, I find. But I asked my editor, Mark Davis at Vermont Public, I said, I'm just going to drive around and ask people, what class are you?
What's that?
And see what happens. And he's like, okay. So I did that, and it was an incredible thing. It's this amazing, it's a kind of a dumb question because it means different things to different people, but it gets sort of underneath a lot of what we believe, and so that you stay out of the whirly whirl of politics, and you get underneath it with that question. So I drove around asking it, and it was really interesting. And I met this young man, Ethan, who was working at the Family Dollar in Orleans, way up in the kingdom. And this is a cut from a story that we made together. And early in this is just a piece of it. But early in the interview, I asked him what his dreams were, and he had said that he wanted to own a pizza shop.
What class do you assume I am?
That's tough to say. I guess middle class.
And is there anything that you sense in my questions that I'm asking that indicates a blind spot in my understanding of your experience?
I suppose it's easy to assume that someone who's been in the middle class their entire life has never had to worry about where their next meal is going to come from. When you're in that spot, it feels like you're you're stranded on a raft, like Tom Hanks in Castaway. And lots of times, and specifically problems with money like this, there's no one who can help you. Everyone's having the same problem, or people who maybe you're doing a little better, you might not be close enough to actually ask for help like that. I was lucky enough recently that one of my coworkers just bought me a bunch of groceries, and it was like a week for her, and I really needed it. I was hurting for hours, and I was lucky enough that she noticed on the schedule that I was hurting for hours. The following week, asked me if everything was okay, and kind of dug deeper, got me to actually talk about it. And her and her husband took us out and stocked our fridge. That kind of thing doesn't happen very often. In a way, you do feel very cut off and alone, at the mercy of the elements. I suppose would be the best way to put it.
If you could describe your fantasy pizza shop, or if you could have exactly what you want, what would it look like?
It would be, I don't know, it would be full of people. I just want it to be a place where people could gather. And a place where people look forward to meeting and having a sense of community there. I'm getting a little emotional, sorry.
Why?
I guess because I don't really talk to people about dreams or aspirations or anything like that very often. I don't even let it seem real to myself very often.
Your vision has to do with making a place where people can be together.
There's nothing like that around here, really. Where do people go to gather? The All-American Legion bar. It's sad. I look at the people that are my age in this area, and not necessarily people I know, but people that come into the store and I see around and stuff like that. And the number of them that are not doing well for themselves when it comes to drugs and stuff like that is really troubling. It's you want to say I expect better of my peers, but at the same time, there's nothing for them to do. and that stuff's easier to obtain than, legitimate good time.
At your pizza place.
Hopefully someday.
I was thinking I think about my age all the time now. It's just a neurotic problem. But I was thinking that when we're young, we are always looking for people with whom we have things in common to befriend, to marry, to raise children with. But now that I'm old, I realize that the quality of my interactions with all the other people is a huge part of the quality of my life. The relationships with my neighbors, the incidental meetings, this is what gives my life context. And so when we think about community and housing and how we want to live in community, I think that we have to start with the fundamentals of how we interact with other humans. And over the, decade or so that I've been making the show, I've come to believe that the ingredients of good community or of good interactions with other people is to always bring humility, curiosity, and a sense of humor to every interaction, and that just yields good stuff. And I think, in fact, that those qualities can solve a lot of the annoying problems that we have, problems of self-righteousness and othering, and problems where, people who really think they know what's what, they know what's good and bad, and they know what's right and wrong. I really, really have trouble with people like that. And we have them on both sides of the political spectrum. So maybe the first building blocks is self-awareness. So like, what am I doing when I'm having a conversation with somebody? What is happening? What am I assuming? What's happening? And I think that we are actually really, really good at falling in love with strangers. I think it's our nature. We were counting votes at the town clerk's office, whatever that last vote was, and I was counting votes with my favorite person who always volunteers with me, and her name is Rose. She's a nutritionist up at Central Vermont Hospital. And, we were just counting ballots together, and then it ended, and we went out to the parking lot to our cars, and we didn't want to part. We have very little in common, but there was a joy that was palpable that we both felt. And it's so small and it's so natural that you can just not notice it. But I think it's everything. I think that's what we're here to do. So when we find each other in these small ways, these small alignments, we are happier, and we're less alone, and we feel connected. And without Rose being there and without me being there, neither one of us would have felt it. We sort of gave it to each other in a way. So I think that's love, maybe, in a large sense of the word. And I want to make shows that remind us of this really natural capacity that we have to fall in love with each other and to find or join with something that's bigger than ourselves. And I think if we bring this attention, this openness and this curiosity and this levity to our interactions with people, then our communities will be stronger. Thank you. I feel like... It occurred to me as I was that I'm talking about things I care about and I think about, but I also am just the only thing that I'm an expert in is boop, boop, beep, beep is actually making podcasts. So that was really, I realized, God, I'm really veering out to foreign territory. So anyway, it was a riff. So I guess now is questions and answers. Does anybody have a question? Yes.
Was there a decisive moment when you decided to practice radical openness?
That's interesting. Oh, the question is, was there a particular moment when you decided to practice radical openness? I think I was a private investigator before I did this. And it was the same need. It was the need for a sort of a high, not high octane, but just an interaction that's true with somebody that I don't know. Because there's something in that feels like useful to do. So I was doing it in a different capacity, but that was still the same thing. And I remember standing at the door, sometimes kind of scared, knocking on the door, looking for a witness or whatever, and feeling like I was preparing myself with that, for that, like, radical openness. That whatever happens here, what I want is for you and for me to have an augmented experience because of each other. Yeah, so it's sort of, yeah. Help me out, people, seriously.
How do you feel about Flatlanders coming to Vermont?
How do you feel about Flatlanders coming to Vermont? I made a show for Vermont Public not too long. It was really fun with, yeah. And the whole idea was she had been here for, I don't know, 2 years maybe. And she's a friend of a friend of mine. And so we went for a drive, and I asked her to take me to places that, when you see your town garage and you first moved here, it might be ugly. You may think, oh my God, it's like gravel. What the hell is that, right? But after you've been here for a little while, the dump, the town garage, these things begin to have context. The Dollar General, there's somebody I love who works there in Hardwick. And so I feel friendly feelings for the Dollar General. And so I wanted to get her sense of that, like her growing context of the place. And also her perspective on humility. Like what was scary about coming in, and how did you listen? And it was I want to do more stories like that. So I guess my feeling is I don't have any strong feeling about it, except for there's so much potential there. But there has to be recognition on everybody's end that there's work to do, that you have to show up and check yourself. Everybody, like your new judgment, or like you have a shitty car in your front yard judgment, right? You say, well, I wonder how you got there, and I wonder how you came here. Again, it's like it protects us, that curiosity. That's kind of a non-answer, but that's what I'm going with.
How have your feelings about Vermont changed across your life?
However, have my feelings about Vermont changed across my life? I think it's like an old. I mean, I grew up here. I left here. I came back here, and I remember. I don't know how. I'm sure other of you have had this experience, but coming back and you go to California and you think, oh my God, why don't I live here? What an idiot. Everybody should live here. And I stay there for like 3 days, and I'm like, I got to get the hell out of here. and it's because it all looks like a postcard to me. It doesn't. The penny doesn't drop down. I don't understand it on a cellular level, on a sensory level, the way I understand this place. So every season, I'm just inundated with wrapped around by familiar sound. And it's mine, right? It feels like where I belong. So I feel like that has just grown. And making these stories I've learned so much that I didn't know about this place. PI work too. I mean, there's a whole Venn diagram circle. There are a lot of Venn diagram circles that do not touch in this state. And you learn that when you're a PI. You learn that if you're a public school teacher. You learn that if you're a nurse. And that was really humbling and really interesting to learn. And this making these stories does that for me all the time. Yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned the dark side of Vermont, and I have a question about the dark side of community, which can be like the tendency to excommunicate or to turn in on itself in ways that ostracize and can be cruel and dehumanizing. And I think probably with the intent to protect whatever people say the nature of their community was. And I wondered if you'd be willing to speak to that a little bit.
I don't think that being cruel and dehumanizing is an urge to protect oneself. I mean, maybe it is, but it's just cruel and dehumanizing. Like, I don't have any insights on that, except for that's not good news, and I don't have any sympathy for it, I guess. I mean, what comes to mind immediately is Hardwick. I started an organization with a couple people there called the Civic Standard, and there's a lot of constant negotiation between sort of the old guard and the new people, and the old guard and the new people, and like, are we going to have iceberg lettuce or a mixed green salad? I mean, these are big deal ticket items. And so it's just, to me, there's got to be willingness to practice. And again, mutual curiosity, I find, and now this is going to sound like pandering maybe, right? But I find that it really takes one person to decide to be actively curious, to be like, no, just want to know who you are and what you're about. And that it just like hits the pinball in a different direction. It doesn't excuse it ever, like people being assholes. I just don't have any time for that. But people being insular and like this, there's lots to work with there. Lots. And again, it's called curiosity. Who are you? What is that? Can I stop by? So, I mean, people are farmers all over the place. Like, if you've stopped in and just walked in the barn and be like, I just wanted to see. My name's Jan. You know, like, curiosity, it can help a lot. But again, nastiness, I don't know the solution to that.
You're talking about storytelling. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the craft of podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, many of us have been raised in the techniques of writing a short,
Mm-hmm.
but there seem to be some wonderful arcs of your podcasts. They go down, then they go up, then they go down, they go up. You know, and
Cool. I didn't know that.
yeah. With stuff. So, can you talk a little bit about craft and how you create those arcs and what you're listening for when you're editing?
I don't know, because it's almost true. It's mostly true that every single time I make a story, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, or I'm like, I don't know how to do this, because it's this story, and I haven't done this one before, so I don't know what to do. I have no idea. I mean, I have some tricks to calm myself down. Mostly it's what it is. I mean, editing is making anything is like 90% awful. And it's like just at the end, you're like, oh my God, I think I understand. And then it's like childbirth, you know, you're happy at the end and you sort of forgot how awful it was. So I don't really know. I mean, a lot of it is just sound, like, oh, that sounds like that goes with that. And sometimes you hear and you're like, oh, that's the beginning of something. Or, oh, that's the end of this show. And that can inform what comes before. So if I had to teach it, I wouldn't have the slightest idea how to do that, except for it's a little bit like music. You're trying to make something that sounds good to your ear. And you're trying to be very true to the person whose life it is, which is a lot more important than your story. So I gave you nothing there, really. I mean, I can tell you how I do it, but it's kind of boring. Like, I just cut it up into teeny little pieces and paste it all over my house. And then I walk around and I go, oh, yeah. And I start making categories and thinking, oh, I see that it's about sort of this, this, and this. And sometimes that works, and sometimes I have to start over and try something else. So I'm sorry. That was a bummer answer.
That sounds familiar.
Exactly. It's awful is the answer. Yeah. Yeah.
What are some or all the tips and tricks that you use to, soothe yourself going into it?
Oh, that's a great question. You mean, how do you calm yourself down? It's well, and if you again, it's the same for everybody who makes things. I think there's an existential crisis that comes. There's the interview, which is its own thing and it has its own excitement, and then there's the logging, that's the first way that you protect yourself. You have to know what it is, so you need a Bible. You need to write it all down and then break it all up. And all the while you're doing that, you're remaining calm because you don't know what the hell you're doing or what it's going to be, but you know you have to do this. So that's a way to. And what you're doing is falling into the tape, which you have to do anyway. So you have to listen to it over and over and over and over and over again. But then what comes is a lot of weeping. And then you have like 3 friends who pick up the phone, and you're like, I just don't think that I can do it this time. And they tell you, I mean, they roll their eyes and they talk you down. Both of the people are, I have a couple radio, but a couple writers who I do that with, and they just take it down. You just have to keep going. You get in the goddamn pool and you stay in the pool until you get out of the pool. That's what it is. What you people love to do is like, oh my God, I have a birthday party, or oh, I really want to go to this party. You can't. You have to stay in the pool until you come out of the pool, even if you're like this, because you've been sitting too long. I think you have to stay inside it until you can. That's the biggest thing: is don't pull back from it. Stay in, go in and in. The other thing is, it's not going to be perfect. It may not even be good, but that's okay, because it's all just one long science project, and then you die. You know, like it is one of many things that you make that are and that lead to death. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And also there's a lot of like, well, it should be this, or there's no right way to do it. You're going to make some choices, and then it's going to be over, and then you're going to move on to the next one. And I think if you treat it with that lightness, sometimes you make something great. If you're like perseverating too much and you bring in a bunch of people and they're like, wow, we're going to try about this, or it can kill it. Let it be imperfect. I like things that are imperfect. Yeah.
So you've made so many beautiful stories, and so many of them I appreciate and have been so touched by. But I really want to draw attention to the episode Finn and the Bell, which is just extraordinary. And I wonder how your life, I'd love to hear anything you have to say about what it was like to have those conversations with the mom, because you created an incredibly sacred space in which it was clear that she could share things that were profound, were transcendent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder what that was like for you, just that experience, but then also all the attention that was so well deserved, but probably really surprising to you, how that changed your life and the podcast. Just, what, if you can share some about that experience with us, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. The end of that story, which I believe is the closest thing I ever heard to my understanding of God. Like whatever the word is, you use whatever you want. But for me, that describes something that feels very like familiar, but true. And that happened in our very first interview. We interviewed many, many times, but all my hair just went shoo, because I couldn't believe what was happening. And at the end of that, I said, I don't think we should make a story. And we stopped because it was so raw. And I thought, is this okay? Like, I'm not a therapist, and I don't want to hurt somebody, and it's only been a year. And I just thought, I don't know. And I'm always doing wrong, stumbling into things without thinking them through very much, maybe. So we stopped, and then we carried on together because we hit it off. And we were drinking sangria one night, and she brought up the story of the bell, and I just went, because it opened out into a story about a community. I thought that we would wait a couple years and make a story about the nature of grief and her. But when she told me the story about the bell, it suddenly felt like, oh, this is about a whole town, and that. We then waded back in together. It was a nightmare, the success of that show on many levels. It was I was dissociative. I felt like I hadn't protected her properly. I had no idea. She was getting hundreds of letters, like Tara Hardwick, and they were getting to her. And I felt responsible. I felt like I hadn't anticipated that or protected her from that. Though she also wanted it. It was cathartic for her, this whole experience. But it was cathartic to make it. And on some level, I think she thought he was alive as long as we were making this story. And would I do the story again? I don't know. although Tara is one of the most emotionally intelligent people I've ever known, and she's a rock star. I mean, she's like, let's do something. She's feisty. She likes to mix it up. So, I mean, she's the one. It was her idea to make this story. She came up to me in a parking lot. I was like, hey, but yeah, it was very, the whole reaction to the story was wonderful. But the other thing is, it's like, oh, your ego is just, it's a wonderful hit for your ego. But when you get that hit for your ego, you feel it, and then it's empty. And then there's this hollow because there's nothing there. And so you're like, what is happening? So there was a lot of not being able to understand what's real or what's ego and then what's substance. And the substance was in the making of it. As always, right? It's in the process of making it and the process of playing it for the people for whom it impacts. That's substance. But when it goes out to the wide world, I mean, my listeners or the people who listen to the show, I feel tight community. I feel like there's a lot of back and forth. So that feels real to me. But just out into the ether, that's not as meaningful as playing it for Hardwick or for Tara, you know? So I want to be careful of your time. Oh, wrap it up.
7:30.
Okay. Is that good? Does anybody have any other?
Can I just ask?
Yes.
So I like it that you just mentioned she came up to the parking lot. Like how often do your stories come up to you? Or is it more often than you can see?
It's a lot. There's a lot of parking lot moments. I mean, the thing is, we live in a small place and we're all kind of connected. So you're like, oh, you should talk to my cousin Jim, you know, or you meet somebody in the barn when you're with Forrest Foster, and it's just a long, what is that game? You know, one thing leads to another thing. And then there are days where like, I have no more stories. I'll never find another story. And then there's panic, like sheer panic. Yeah, exactly. Help me. Right. Yeah, so there's that too. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Will there be more music? I mean, Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Yeah, I know. It was really good. Yeah.
Is on constantly.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree. I don't know what to say about that, but I should do a lot more singing. Total Eclipse of the Heart. I should actually just make that show over and over again with new friends and new recordings. Yeah, no, I got to get back to more musical. I wanted to make a musical forever. I tried to do it with Scott Carrier, and he wouldn't sing, which was, it was kind of a fail, that show, but I like it. It was a great interview. But then I wrote the songs based on the interview, and then I sang the songs, and it's kind of clunky, but I don't know. It's kind of, again, it's imperfect, but it was fun, and it's got something to it. You don't have to love all of it. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all a lot for coming. And thank you, Lucinda and Jacob, so much, and Sierra, and my son, Henry.
Yeah.